Hello, and welcome to day 2 of Scary Movie Month. I am Anders Holmes, and I am the host of the Holmes Movies podcast. The second film on my 31 Days of Horror list is Victor Salva's Jeepers Creepers. Before the rise of horror torture films like Saw and Hostel and the wave of remakes of classic horror films. This film came out in the year 2001 and became like a really big cultural phenomenon, like a real cult film, I should say. And it's a very different kind of horror film. It harkens back to the days of creature features. It's very much like Creature of the Black Lagoon meets Jewel. And you can really tell that Victor Salva is a really huge fan of monster films and really grew up on monster films and watched them a lot as a kid. And, you could really tell in this movie that he really wanted to do his own kind of monster film and do something that was quite unique and original. And the film does follow the same sort of tropes that you've seen in a lot of other horror films. But I like that he tries to do something a little bit different and makes a film that relies more on tension and atmosphere rather than having a lot of jump scares and gory moments, and using a lot and having a lot of blood in the film. Like, there are some really gory scenes, like when Justin Long's character Derry goes into the lair of the creeper and finds all the bodies hanging on the wall. Like that, those scenes like that are horrific and they stick with you. But the film relies a lot more on creating a really ominous atmosphere throughout the entire film that just makes it just so creepy and tense. Like, I watched this film when I was 10 years old. That was the first time I'd seen this film. Like, I knew about it and stuff like that, and I wasn't a huge fan of watching horror films at that time because I didn't want to get scared, and now I'm a huge fan of them now. But like, it was on TV and I started watching it because I was like interested in seeing what it was like, because I'd seen trailers for it and things like that, and like, it petrified me. Like, every time when I went out to the countryside where I lived with my family in England, I was always scared of being out in the fields and thinking like, oh my God, is something gonna come out and take me away, like in this movie with this winged bat from hell. Like, it really, it has this ability to make daytime seem really scary. Like, horror films like come alive when when night falls. Like, that's when they're the creepiest. But Victor Salva has this sort of ability in making a long, lonely road in rural Florida in the daytime seem extremely scary, and like, you could just like feel like, oh my God, is there something in the bushes, and like things like that. And it just, like, imagine if you were on a desolate road and your car breaks down and you have to get out of the car to fix it, and you're always thinking like, is there something out there? Am I being watched? And it just, you out there in the middle of nowhere, like, anything could possibly happen, and you're always going to feel like, I really hope nothing bad happens, and things like that. The film does have some, like, the film is not completely original. It does fall on cliche a little bit, but mainly towards the last sort of 30 minutes of the movie. But the film has a really strong vision from Victor Salva, and you can really tell that he had very capable and strong collaboration on this film, from the design on the creature to the cinematography to the music, which harkens back to the days of Universal monster films like Frankenstein or Dracula. Like, it has like a really cool orchestral feel to it that makes the film feel very scary, especially during the opening scenes where Derry and Trish, played by Justin Long and Gina Phillips, are driving past this rundown church, and they see the creeper throwing bodies down this pipe into his lair, and then being chased down by his his truck, this like monstrous thing that is just so like iconic and memorable and like so terrifying. It's just like, it personifies the evil of this character, and like the scenes where he's bashing into them and running them off the road are so frightening, and it's really helped by the music and how like the camera is on top of the car, and it has this POV, like this kind of monster flying out to try and grab and snare his victims. Like, I think moments like that make this film very memorable, and it just shows that Victor Salva had a really strong idea of what he wanted when he was writing the script, and then he was able to get the right people to help bring that vision to the screen. And it's quite cool that when you're writing a script and you have the people who understand what you're trying to do and they're able to bring your vision to the screen. And it just shows that everybody on this film really knew exactly what they were doing and able to understand the director. Like the director had like a real clear understanding of what needed to be done and what could be done with what they had, and be able to, scare and surprise the audience who went into this film, who were probably expecting like the usual kind of horror films that were coming out at this time. Throughout the film, you're not really quite sure who is this thing that's stalking them, and then you slowly realize like, okay, it's not a human, it's a monster, and it's a very original and unique monster played brilliantly by Jonathan Breck, and you slowly start to learn a lot more about it and know that it's kind of like this thing that wakes every 23 years for 23 days and hunts down and people and eats parts of their body that it needs to survive, which sounds a little bit similar to Stephen King's It, now that I think about it. But, I love the sort of mythology that Victor Salva creates, and, he tries to sort of, elaborate on that in the sequel. And, you get the idea that this thing's been around for 1,000 years and, no one's been able to kill it. Like, it's pretty much unstoppable. And it makes the film, raises the stakes a little bit, because you want the characters to survive this ordeal that they've been put into. And that's one of the things I really liked coming to the characters, is that, like when I talked about Scream, you have moments where you really get to know the characters before the bloody carnage happens. And in this film, you really get to love and be interested in these characters. And I like how the film ditches that usual horror trope with a boy and a girl, a couple, they're on a road trip and then they get, stalked by a killer. And I liked in this film, Victor Salva ditches that for a brother and sister relationship, and it makes for something a little bit more relatable. And I really loved all those moments in the car in the beginning of the film where they're, bickering with one another. You get a bit of a history with them. Like they have this game where they look in license plate and try to, get things out of them. And, with the whole like gay fever, gay forever, and then it's sexy forever. And you see that they have like a little game with them that they've been playing for years. And I really like that. And you really got to know the characters, and, and it really like eases into the horror quite easily when the truck shows up and starts, honking that horrible the type sound that it does. Like that's still terrifying, that sound effect. And, and then when night falls and then they see the creeper, like it's such a horrifying moment. And I think that's where this film really succeeds more than the sequel, which came out 2 years later. Like, I think Jeepers Creepers 2 is fun. Like, it's a very entertaining film. It's not as imaginative as the first film. I think Victor Salva falls into this trap of trying to do too much and has far too many characters who aren't as interesting than Trish and Derry, and a lot of them are quite one-dimensional, and there's far too many to really care about. And the only one you really care about and have an interest with is Misty, who has like some sort of psychic connection with what's going on, and gets to understand what the creeper is and what it wants, without any really clear understanding of why that actually happens. But it's a fun film, and it has some really cool moments, and it's got Ray Wise, Leland Palmer, who's this like Captain Ahab type character who's trying to hunt down the creeper after he kills his son at the beginning of the movie. I think it's like there's two plots that are kind of coinciding against each other. You have all this story with these kids on the bus being hunted by the creeper, and then you have Ray Wise, who's trying to sort of build up revenge against the creeper. And I think that storyline was a lot more interesting, and that was kind of helped because Ray Wise actually plays his character really well, and I wanted to see a lot more of that, because the kids, I kind of lost interest with them, and I didn't really care for them as much as I cared for Trish and Derry. I wanted to see them, hopefully get out of this situation. But, like most horror films, the characters that you come to love in the film, they usually don't make it out. And with the release of Jeepers Creepers 3, it seems like Victor Salva is really trying to build up interest with these films again. Like, this is the first film that's come out since 2003, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding the film because of Victor Salva's criminal history. And it's really overshadowed the film a little bit, and it's only being shown during one-day screenings. So, it's slowly building up some sort of interest, and there's sort of build up for a fourth one. But this film's been in development for so long, it's quite hard to know if this film is ever going to, you know, gain enough interest in making a fourth film and, you know, in completing that franchise, because Jeepers Creepers 3, from what I've read, the reviews aren't great, but from what I've read, it seems to be sort of bridging the gap between the first one and the second film, which doesn't seem as appealing. But I don't know. Let's see what happens with that, and maybe we'll get another one. Who knows? But I really like the first one. It's very terrifying, and it's a very different kind of horror film, and it's a very different kind of horror film that came at a time where, you know, people wanted something a little bit different, and I think it brought that. And it's still quite scary to this day. I really like it, and if you haven't seen it, go check it out, and if you have, watch it again, and, you know, see what you think, see if it still holds up.